This submitted material brilliantly argues that modern SAP FICO blueprints must evolve from traditional internal accounting designs into foundational, real-time compliance and data architectures.
It is a fantastic premise.
It really is, and right off the bat, I have to say, the architectural logic presented here is incredibly strong. But there are a few high-level structural opportunities to maximize its impact that we should just jump straight into.
I completely agree. Let's get into it.
So setting the stage, what works beautifully from the jump is the core strength of the piece. It clearly identifies that downstream compliance failures stem from upstream design decisions rather than operational errors.
Right, exactly. Which is such a constructive way to frame it.
It is! Taking something conventionally treated as a pure accounting exercise and elevating it to this enterprise-wide data architecture issue shows, a really deep understanding of the stakes and a continuous transaction control environment.
Absolutely.
And this leads right into our first big critique. The material makes this strong case for decoupling tax logic from the SAP core and moving it to an external layer. And as I read it, I just kept thinking about the sheer physical difficulty of executing that.
Oh, yeah.
It feels a little like trying to swap out a car's engine while you're actively driving 70 miles an hour down the highway.
That's a perfect analogy. And really, while the architectural vision of externalizing tax logic is highly compelling, the material currently overlooks the messy reality of how an enterprise actually transitions from a legacy embedded system to this new model.
Right. It frames it as a strictly binary choice.
Exactly. It paints this picture where either you have a legacy system with embedded logic, which is, the bad state.
The dark ages.
Right? Or you have a clean SAP core with an external compliance platform, which is the good state.
And that binary framing just leaves a massive gap for the actual architect reading this, right?
A huge gap.
Because the architect reading this likely has a system burdened with a decade of technical debt. We're talking thousands of custom tax codes, Z-tables.
Oh, the Z-tables.
Yeah, those highly customized, rigid database tables that are just notoriously brittle.
Yeah, they break if you look at them wrong.
Exactly. And all these rigid condition records deeply entrenched in their environment. So if the text only gives them the utopian end state without the bridge to get there, well, they're going to read it and think, great theory, but I can't just rip and replace my entire global tax config overnight.
No, nobody can. If the advice basically boils down to just be in the good state, it completely loses its utility for someone who is, neck deep in a brownfield implementation.
Or a mid-flight upgrade.
Right. We need to explicitly acknowledge a transitional state, or a hybrid approach to make this actually practical. Because architects working with existing legacy burdens, they need a blueprint for dismantling the old engine while keeping the car moving.
So let's build that bridge for the author. If I'm an architect, I don't want to touch the legacy mess if I don't absolutely have to.
Nobody does.
So what if the text detailed something like the Strangler fig migration pattern?
Oh, that is a perfect architectural concept to introduce here.
Right?
Yeah, for those deeply embedded in software design, the Strangler fig pattern is well known. It basically involves gradually creating a new system around the edges of the old one.
Like the actual plant?
Exactly, like a tree growing around an existing structure until the old one can be safely retired.
But how would that actually look on the page for an SAP environment? Like, how do you route the traffic?
Well, the author could describe a scenario where the architect explicitly freezes the legacy tax configuration.
Just puts a hard stop on it?
Exactly. They draw a line and say, we aren't ripping this out, but we aren't adding to it either. Instead, they mandate that any new continuous transaction control mandates are routed exclusively through the new external data orchestration layer.
Oh, okay. So matching the company is entering a new European market.
Right, like Poland or Romania.
Yeah, places with incredibly strict e-invoicing mandates.
Exactly. So the legacy SAP system handles the old world flows, but the new external system handles the new world flows. And over time, you migrate the old countries piece by piece into the new layer.
That makes so much sense. It immediately lowers the temperature in the room for the architect.
It really does.
It takes this monumental, career-risking change and turns it into a manageable series of stepping stones. But wait, what if they don't want to transition by geography?
What do you mean?
Like, what if they want to transition by function? Could the author detail a phased functional rollout? Say, externalizing just the validation phase first.
Oh, yes. And honestly, that is arguably a safer path for a highly risk-averse organization.
Yeah.
The text could show how the SAP core still calculates the tax initially, but the external platform is used strictly to validate the partner data and the document structure against government rules.
So they're just checking the math, basically.
Right. This is crucial because it allows the business to build trust in the external layer without giving up control of the actual financial determination.
Which finance teams are terrified of doing.
Exactly. Once they see that the external validation layer is catching errors before they hit the ledger, they become much more willing to move to phase 2.
Which is fully externalizing the tax determination and the rate application.
You got it.
So, by giving the reader those two distinct pathways, the strangler fig by geography or the phased rollout by function, the text transitions from just theoretical to highly actionable.
Absolutely.
Now, phasing the software is one thing, right? But phasing the people who manage it is a whole different beast.
Oh, the people are always the hardest part.
Always. And the argument in the notes insists that indirect tax specialists must be physically present in the blueprinting workshops, to ensure compliance fields are included from day one. But I want to push back a little here.
Okay, go for it.
Aren't SAP architects usually just trying to survive their project timelines? I mean, how do they realistically force a culture change between deeply siloed accounting and tax teams?
It's a great point. Moving beyond the technical architecture, the piece identifies the absence of indirect tax specialists in design workshops, but it underestimates the political friction involved in integrating these competing departmental priorities.
Yeah, it makes a massive assumption.
It really does. It acts as if just sending a calendar invite to the indirect tax specialists to join the blueprint workshops will miraculously solve the compliance gaps.
Like everyone's just going to sit down and hold hands.
Right. It completely ignores the historical standoff between these two factions. Think about what actually motivates them.
Well, internal accounting wants operational speed and simplicity.
Exactly.
If you have an accounts payable clerk processing like 1,000 invoices a day,
Oh, yeah.
every single additional required field is friction. It costs time, it costs money, and it slows down the close.
Right. And then on the flip side, the indirect tax team wants exhaustive, comprehensive fields populated on every single transaction.
They want all the data.
They do. They don't care about the AP clerk's keystrokes. They care about satisfying an external government validation platform that will reject the entire XML file if, a specific tax jurisdiction code is missing.
Wow, yeah. So if the architect just invites the head of tax into the accounting workshop without a predefined framework,
It's going to be a bloodbath.
a total bloodbath.
The text accurately diagnoses the absence of the tax team, but it abandons the architect right when the actual conflict begins.
It's like moving two people into an apartment together, where one is a hyper-minimalist who wants absolutely no furniture to clean around,
Ha ha, yes.
and the other is an archivist who wants every single item cataloged and cross-referenced. You can't just put them in the empty living room and say, figure it out.
You need ground rules.
Exactly.
So the author needs to equip our embattled SAP architect with tactical, political methodology on how to actually mediate this conflicting set of requirements.
I completely agree. The author needs to provide a translation framework on the page. Show the architect how to take a rigid tax requirement and reframe it so that it sounds like a massive win for the accounting team.
Oh, that's smart. So instead of the architect walking in and saying, tax needs 10 new mandatory fields for regulatory compliance, which is going to slow down your invoice processing by 15%, which will immediately get rejected.
Right. Instead, they frame it around data governance.
Exactly.
They could say, by enforcing these specific master data validations at the point of entry, accounting will experience a 40% reduction in month-end reconciliation errors.
Boom. You translate the text need into an accounting benefit.
That is exactly how you win the room.
You teach the architect to speak both languages, to find the overlapping value. But the text can actually go even further by introducing structural project gates.
Project gates?
Yeah. Right now, the success of a blueprint is almost entirely measured by whether it's finished on time and under budget.
Sad but true.
So the author could suggest implementing a data readiness index as a shared KPI during the blueprint phase itself.
A data readiness index, I really like the sound of that. How would that function as a gate?
Well, it becomes a shared metric that physically forces the CFO and the head of tax to align on document structure fields before any configuration begins.
So they can't even start building.
Right. The rule would be that the blueprint cannot be signed off and development literally cannot start until the Data Readiness Index proves that the proposed structure satisfies both the speed requirements of accounting and the compliance requirements of tax.
Wow. That fundamentally shifts the entire dynamic.
It really does.
It takes the abstract advice of like, you guys should collaborate more, and turns it into a hard stop. You physically cannot proceed to the build phase until the friction is resolved.
Exactly. And it positions the SAP architect as a strategic mediator who is driving alignment.
Rather than just a passive note-taker caught in the crossfire between two angry vice presidents.
Which is a much more empowering narrative for the reader.
Absolutely, but enforcing those shared KPIs like a data readiness index requires serious executive buy-in.
Oh, massive buy-in.
And an architect can't win that political battle if they're pitching the project strictly as a defensive risk mitigation exercise. Which actually brings us to our third critique, the actual language the author is using to secure that buy-in.
Right.
Throughout the material, there is a very heavy reliance on vivid, high-stakes language. Words like catastrophically expensive, millions lost, and permanent constraint.
Yeah. And although the arguments are structurally sound, the text relies too heavily on fear-based language, which risks exhausting the reader rather than inspiring them to adopt the solution. Like compliance failures, massive remediation projects, and tax audits, it creates a really strong initial hook.
Sure, it gets your attention.
But over thousands of words, it becomes a really fatiguing read.
Alarm fatigue is real. If every paragraph is telling you that the sky is falling and the government is coming for your revenue, you eventually just stop looking up.
You just tune it out.
You really do. But more importantly, it inadvertently boxes the SAP architect into a corner. It frames their entire value proposition as, I am the person who stops us from getting fined.
Which is a purely defensive posture.
Exactly.
And it entirely misses the upside. It doesn't position them as a value creator who is actively driving the business forward.
Right.
Is there a risk that by focusing solely on the negative consequences of a bad architecture, the material overlooks the incredible strategic advantages of getting this architecture right?
Oh, absolutely. It's the difference between buying an alarm system and buying a sports car.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, the alarm system is a grudge purchase born of anxiety. You buy it because you have to.
Right.
The sports car is an aspirational purchase born of vision. A CFO will fund an alarm system, but they won't be excited about it, and they'll try to buy the absolute cheapest one possible.
So true. So the author needs to deliberately balance this risk avoidance framing with a strong positive vision of enterprise growth and agility.
Yes.
Show the reader what this clean architectural core actually enables the business to do, beyond just keeping the government tax authorities happy.
So what's a good example of that?
Well, let's look at market agility as a prime example the author could use. The text could include a scenario where externalizing the tax logic allows a company to enter a new geographical market 30% faster.
Oh, wow. Because in the legacy world, launching operations in a new country requires a massive, 6-month localization project within the ERP core.
Just to get the tax codes and condition records right.
Right, you have to hire specialized developers, test the core system, and risk breaking existing logic.
But in the clean core model, the ERP doesn't change at all. You simply configure the new jurisdictional rules in the external compliance layer.
That is a massive competitive advantage.
Exactly.
If I'm a CFO, avoiding a €5 billion fine is table stakes. But if you tell me this architecture allows us to beat our competitors to the Romanian market by 3 months because we don't have to rebuild our SAP core, I mean, now I'm leaning forward in my chair.
You've given the architect a completely different slide for their steering committee deck.
You really have.
That changes the whole conversation from a cost center to a revenue enabler. And the author could double down on that by highlighting mergers and acquisitions.
Oh, M&A is always such a huge pain point.
M&A integration is notoriously painful in enterprise tech. Usually when you acquire a company, you spend 6 to 12 months just mapping their broken, customized legacy tax logic to your broken, customized legacy tax logic.
Yeah. It's an integration nightmare that just delays the actual realization of the merger's value.
Exactly. The author could highlight how enforcing strict master data governance for VAT numbers and entity structures in the blueprint phase
directly accelerates M&A velocity.
Accelerates M&A velocity. I love that phrase.
Right? When your core data is standardized and cleanly decoupled from local tax nuances, onboarding a newly acquired subsidiary becomes infinitely smoother.
Because you aren't untangling their bad tax logic from your bad tax logic.
No, you're just mapping their clean data into your clean core. That is pure, undeniable business value that executives care deeply about.
And what's brilliant about injecting those specific examples, like market agility and M&A velocity, is that it actually proves the author's own thesis on the page.
How so?
Well, in their conclusion, they note that well-designed structures enable capabilities their designers never anticipated.
Ah, yes.
By showing how a compliance architecture speeds up a corporate acquisition, the text transitions its tone from a dire warning to a strategic blueprint for competitive dominance.
It makes the architect the hero of the story, not just the guard at the gate.
Exactly. Well, this has been a truly fantastic deconstruction of a very dense, highly technical, and honestly deeply important topic.
It really has.
Let's do a quick recap of the 3 main areas of high-level feedback we've covered today to help maximize the impact of this SAP blueprint material.
Sure.
First, we address the technical transition phase, ensuring a material doesn't just present a binary choice between legacy debt and a clean core, but actually builds a bridge for the reader. Second, we explored the critical need to provide tactical frameworks to manage the political friction that inevitably occurs when you lock accounting and tax teams in the same design room.
Right.
And third, we talked about balancing the tone, shifting away from purely fear-based, defensive language to highlight the incredible value creation and strategic agility this architecture enables.
Perfect summary. And just to quickly reiterate the actionable tools the author can implement to achieve this, for the transition bridge, introduce the strangler fig migration pattern to route new mandates externally, or detail a phased functional rollout, starting with validation. To handle the organizational friction, arm the architect with a translation framework to reframe tax requirements as accounting wins, and introduce a shared blueprint KPI like a data readiness index.
Yes.
And finally, to balance the tone, inject positive business scenarios like accelerated new market entry and frictionless M&A integration.
Spot on. So, to the listener who submitted this, thank you so much. This is a wonderfully robust, technically fascinating piece of work that tackles a genuinely critical issue in enterprise architecture. We would warmly invite you to implement these suggestions and submit your revised draft or really any future materials back in for another critique.
Yeah, we'd love to see where you take it next.
Because ultimately, whether you're designing a real-time compliance architecture or pouring a concrete foundation, the goal is exactly the same. You want to build something so structurally sound and so perfectly aligned with the people using it that you never have to pick up the jackhammer.